The sound of metal scraping against my lock on Christmas Eve wasn't a surprise. I'd been sitting in the dark waiting for it. It was 9 p.m. The house was cold because I'd left it that way on purpose. No lights, no car in the driveway, every window dark and still. From across the room, I recognized the headlights swinging down my driveway. I knew the rumble of my brother's truck. I knew the way he laughs when he thinks he's already beaten you. My parents were out there. His wife too. And whatever they were carrying into my life that night was more dangerous than a lockpicking set. My name is Melissa. I'm 36. This is the story of the family that kept me standing outside every table they ever sat, and the night they tried to take the only door that ever had my name on it. If you've ever been the person a family quietly decides doesn't count, stay with me. I first noticed the chair problem when I was 8. Our dining room had a long table my mother dressed like a photo shoot every December. Cloth napkins in rings. The good ceramic plates with the tiny blue flowers. A centerpiece that took her all of Saturday to assemble. Pine cones and silver ribbon and little fake frosted branches arranged just so. That year, I stood in the doorway in my Christmas dress and counted. Chair for Dad. Chair for Mom. Chair for my brother Derek, who was 4 and already difficult. Chairs for both sets of grandparents who'd made the drive. A chair for my uncle. And then the table just stopped. I stood there long enough that my mother noticed me counting. She didn't get sharp with me. That was never her way. Instead, she walked over, crouched down, pressed my collar flat with both thumbs, and gave me a soft, patient look, the kind adults use when they've already decided on the answer to a question they haven't heard yet. "We've only got so many places to go around, sweetheart," she said. Then she handed me a plate and pointed toward the kitchen. I ate that Christmas dinner on a step stool beside the stove, listening to the voices and laughter drift through the wall. I told myself it was a fluke. A year with too many guests. Smart children are very talented at constructing reasons the painful things make sense. But the next year it happened again. And the year after. The faces at the table shifted. Relatives moved away, grandparents got sick and stopped coming. But somehow the number of chairs never changed to include me. I'd spent years thinking the shortage was about space or logistics. It was never about space. It was always only about me. I want to say something clearly, because people who hear stories like this tend to assume the worst. Nobody hurt me. No one locked me in rooms or screamed at my face or told me I was worthless. Looking back, I almost wish they had. Violence at least announces itself. What I lived inside was something quieter and harder to name, a careful, practiced absence, an ongoing subtraction that nobody ever owned up to. On Christmas mornings, there were gifts under the tree for Dad, for Mom, for Derek. Sometimes a few for cousins. I would kneel on the carpet and read every tag twice, the way you check a grade twice hoping it changes. Mine was never there. Sometime mid-afternoon, usually with an explanation woven in, "We didn't want you getting spoiled," something practical would appear. A hairbrush. Thick socks. In every family photo from those years, I'm half a step to the side. The camera never quite chose me. So I chose myself, the only way a child knows how. By becoming useful. I made my own breakfasts at 7. Packed my own lunches. Figured out hair braiding by watching my own reflection in the chrome of the toaster. By 12, I could run the household better than either of my parents. Not because anyone asked. Because I'd decided that if I was helpful enough, indispensable enough, good enough, there would finally be a chair. There wasn't. The chair was never the point. I just couldn't see the real question yet, the one sitting submerged under everything. Why me? Why, in a family of 4, did the math only fail for one person? There was something on my mother's dresser. A small silver frame, angled slightly toward the wall. Inside it, a photograph of a pale yellow hospital blanket, folded, empty, draped across someone's arms. No baby visible. Just the blanket and my mother's hands. I asked about it when I was 9 or 10. She lifted it from my fingers so gently and so swiftly it felt rehearsed. "That's not for you to worry about," she said. And I never asked again. Every December, around the second week of the month, she would go somewhere inside herself. Not dramatically. There were no scenes. She'd just drift. Forget to start dinner. Sit at the kitchen window with her coffee going cold. My father would move more quietly those days, like the floors might give. I only knew that her most unreachable stretches always came right before Christmas, arriving like a cold front, predictable and unavoidable. The half-turned photograph. The December silences. The table that always ran short. I felt as a child, without language for it, that these things were connected, that somewhere in my mother there was a door I'd been born standing outside of. I blamed myself. Children do. It would take 26 more years to learn what the yellow blanket meant. And when I finally did, it made sense of everything and excused nothing. I left the day after my 18th birthday. That was May 2007. I'd been saving toward it the way you save for escape, obsessively, secretly, without telling anyone the money had a destination. Babysitting earnings. Birthday 5s and 10s folded into a sock. A summer of scooping ice cream. A winter of shoveling driveways in the dark before school. By 18, I had just over $1,000, a battered Toyota I'd bought from a neighbor's son for $400, and a bag I could pack in under 10 minutes. I packed it the morning I left. Clothes. Toothbrush. My diploma. One photograph of myself, taken by a friend's mother, not mine, in which I was actually in the center of the frame, not edging out of it. No one tried to stop me. My mother was at the sink. My father was behind his newspaper. Derek, 14 and already moving through the world like he owned it, didn't look up from the television. "Let us know where you land," my mother said. And that was the whole of it. I drove 3 hours and pulled off at a highway diner and cried in the parking lot until I was empty. Then I went in and ordered eggs and the worst coffee I'd ever tasted, and I made myself a promise over that terrible cup. Someday I would have a place with my name on it. A real place. A door I chose the lock for. A house where no one got to decide whether there was room for me. I had no idea how. I knew I would. I started with a mop and a yellow bucket. That's not a metaphor, that's literally what I started with. My first client was a woman working double shifts who'd run out of hours for anything except keeping her kids fed and herself upright. I cleaned her kitchen so thoroughly she cried and immediately called 2 friends. Those friends called 2 more. I built a client list 1 referral at a time while sleeping in my car behind a grocery store with a thrift store blanket pulled to my chin, showering at a $9 a month gym. Every dollar that came in got divided into 3: gas, supplies, and what I called the house fund. Not a metaphor then either. A literal jar. Here's the thing about growing up always a little short on belonging. You develop an almost pathological fear of failure because failure feels like proof they were right about you. So I over-delivered on everything. I scrubbed things no one would ever look at. I went back to fix things no one had complained about. I worked sick. I worked exhausted. I worked every holiday because holidays paid double, and because I had nowhere anyone was expecting me anyway. It made me exceptional at the work. It also nearly broke me 3 times before I turned 30. By 25, I had 2 employees. By 28, a company with a real name, Holloway Home Care, a logo, and a reputation in the good neighborhoods for being the one service they trusted with spare keys. We didn't just clean. We watched over homes. We managed estate move-outs, helped elderly clients keep their houses in order, stood in for the families who lived somewhere warmer 9 months of the year. I was building, without ever quite naming it this way, a company founded on the exact thing I'd been denied. A place where nobody got left standing in the doorway. The family calls never stopped entirely. They just arrived in patterns. I'd try every year or 2, right around Christmas, hoping something had shifted. It never had. Meanwhile, secondhand reports arrived through my cousin Claire, the one person in the extended family who kept talking to me, and they were always about Derek. Derek's Sweet 16 backyard party, catered. Derek's graduation hall rental. Derek's college fund, untouched because he'd decided college wasn't for him, but the money was still there, wasn't it? Derek's lawn service that folded by March. His vending route that disappeared. His consulting company that was mainly a rented truck and a website. Each collapse, my parents had absorbed. Each shortfall covered. They'd been slowly refinancing their own security to fund his soft landings, and the soft landings kept getting softer while the money got harder to find. I knew most of this from Claire, who couldn't help narrating the family the way some people narrate weather. She'd call and say, "Your folks bailed Derek out again," the way another person might say it was raining. The rain was running out. By the time I was 34, Derek had married a woman named Sasha. They'd bought more house than they could pay for and filled it with things bought on credit and optimism. The business loan he'd personally guaranteed, $87,000, had collapsed along with the business. The lender was not his mother. The lender wanted the money back. Their landlord had begun eviction paperwork. I didn't know the number yet. I didn't know the shape of the desperation. But I knew my brother. I knew that a man raised to believe the world will catch him eventually looks for whoever is standing nearby with open arms. I just bought a house. The timing was not lost on me. The last time I'd seen the whole family in one place before all this was at a funeral. My grandmother on my father's side, the one who used to press folded tens into my palm and call me her golden girl, had passed, and I'd driven 4 hours to be there. I sat in the back of the church. Afterward, I did what I do. I made myself useful. Refilled the coffee. Cleared plates. Carried things between the kitchen and the folding tables in the church hall. Derek found me at the sink. He'd had too much of the cheap funeral wine and was wearing it as confidence. He leaned against the counter and watched me work with a loose, comfortable smile. "You don't have to do all this," he said. "The church ladies take care of it. I don't mind." He looked at me a moment longer. Then he said it easy, almost helpful, the way you'd mention someone had something in their teeth. "You know you don't have to keep showing up, right? Nobody expects you here. You were never really one of us, Melissa." He drifted off toward the wine. I stood there with a dish towel in my hands and water running, and those words settling into me like cold into a foundation, down through the layers, deep and slow. You were never really one of us. I dried my hands. I set the towel on the counter. And somewhere between the folding chairs and the bad coffee, I made a decision I didn't fully recognize I was making. I stopped waiting for their table to have room for me. If I wasn't one of them, then their math could no longer hurt me. I would build my own table. I would decide who sat at it. The years after that were the best of my life. Holloway Home Care grew the way good things grow, slowly and then suddenly. By 2025, I had 4 vans and 13 employees. I had contracts with half the estates in the county. People handed me their keys before winter trips without thinking twice, because everyone who worked with us knew. We treated a home like it was something sacred. I knew what a home meant in a way my wealthy clients mostly didn't. They'd always had one. I'd spent 20 years trying to earn the right to one. I paid my people well and on time. Gave Claire's daughter her first job. Learned the parts of business school doesn't teach. Liability coverage, contract language, the careful paperwork that keeps a small company from getting swallowed whole. I became, without quite noticing it happen, a woman of real stability. Not wealthy the way magazines mean. Secure. The kind where you check your account balance and feel calm instead of cold. My family had no idea. They still pictured me somewhere in a rental, barely keeping up, paying a price for whatever pride I'd had at 18. They never asked what I was doing because they weren't curious about my life. They were curious about my absence from theirs. They had no idea what I was about to do with 15 years of savings. I found the house in September 2025 on a street called Birchwood Lane. 3 stories of brick, a wraparound porch, a turret on the northeast corner that caught the morning light. Built in 1909. Loved hard and then neglected, the kind of house that scares off buyers who don't know what they're looking at. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I'd spent 15 years inside houses like this. The day I walked through the empty rooms, I stopped in the front hall and saw it. A long table by the bank of south-facing windows, set for whoever I chose to invite. I bought the house with my own money, every dollar of the down payment traced back to that bucket and that truck and 15 years of refusing to fail. At the closing, I signed my name so many times my hand cramped. I didn't care. Each signature pressed the house a little more firmly into my life. When the attorney slid the final document across the table, I read the top line 3 times. Grantee Melissa Holloway. Sole owner. I had spent a lifetime not being counted. Now there was a legal document that counted me as the only one. That night I sat on my own front porch in the dark and felt something I didn't have a name for, something big and quiet and very hard to look at directly. 18-year-old me in that diner parking lot would not have believed it possible. I had built the place no one could lock me out of. I should have been able to leave the story there. The news reached my family in 3 weeks. Claire mentioned the house to her sister, who mentioned it to my mother, and then the temperature of my entire extended family shifted overnight like a front moving through. My mother called me on a Tuesday, my mother, who had not initiated a call in over 2 years, just to say she'd been thinking about me and wondered how I was settling in. Her voice was warm in a way I recognized immediately because I had 36 years of experience distinguishing her real warmth from her useful warmth. They feel similar until you've been burned enough times to notice the difference. "I hear you found yourself a beautiful old place," she said, light and casual. "We'd really love to come see it sometime." "It's been too long." 2 days later, Derek texted. No greeting. Just questions. How many bedrooms, what the market looked like, whether it was in my name alone. "Just you on the deed?" I set my phone on the counter and looked at it. There are questions that come from curiosity and questions that come from someone measuring something. I'd run a business for 15 years. I knew the difference between a casual inquiry and a site survey. I made tea. I sat with the quiet feeling, the one I'd been trusting since I was 8 years old because it was the only thing that had ever told me the truth. And the quiet feeling said, "Be careful." I called my attorney. Not a friend, not Claire, my actual real estate attorney, a composed and sharp woman named Ruth Calloway. I told her about the sudden warmth, about Derek's texts, about the "just you on the deed." I asked her plainly whether someone could take a house from you if they decided they wanted to. There was a pause. The professional kind, before difficult information. "More than you'd think," Ruth said. She explained it methodically. Deed fraud. Someone forges your signature on a quitclaim deed, a simple form transferring ownership, and files it with the county recorder's office. The recorder doesn't verify signatures. They log what's handed across the counter. On paper, your house can appear to belong to someone else before you've had your morning coffee. And here was the part that made the floor drop out from under me. Ruth said that in roughly 9 out of 10 cases, the person filing the forged deed is not a stranger. It's someone the victim knows. Often family. 9 out of 10 times. I sat with the phone to my ear and felt a specific, terrible kind of recognition, not surprise exactly. Something more like, "Of course. Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "There is," Ruth said. "Let me tell you about a property fraud alert." What she described was a free service through the county recorder. You register your name and parcel number, and the moment any document is filed against your property, a deed, a lien, a transfer, you receive an immediate notification. You become the first to know instead of the last. It wouldn't stop someone from filing, Ruth warned. The recorder still takes what's handed to them. But knowing the instant it happens changes everything. I enrolled that afternoon. Filled in my parcel number, clicked confirm, and received a quiet email acknowledging the registration. I printed it. Then I printed a certified copy of my own recorded deed, the one with my name and the county's stamp, and laid both pages on my kitchen table. One page said the house was mine. The other promised I'd know the second anyone tried to say it wasn't. I didn't mention any of this to my family. I kept my voice warm and vague whenever my mother called. I let them continue picturing the girl with the duffel bag, scraping by, not paying attention to her own paperwork. The quiet feeling was still talking, and what it said was, "Don't show them what you know." The number came through Claire in late October. She called breathless, opening with, "I probably shouldn't say anything," which is how she opens every call that contains actual news. Derek had personally guaranteed a business loan, $87,000, for a venture that had collapsed before summer ended. The lender wasn't family. The lender wanted to be paid. He and Sasha had fallen behind on their rental. Eviction proceedings had begun. My parents, Claire said, had finally run dry. 30 years of bailouts had thinned their savings and mortgaged what remained of their own home. There was nothing left to catch him with this time. I listened. I did the math. 87,000 in debt. A man raised to expect rescue. A sister 2 counties away with a paid-off mansion he'd just learned existed. A mother who'd suddenly rediscovered her warmth for that sister right around the same time. The pieces arranged themselves into a picture I didn't want to look at, but I looked at it anyway. This wasn't the beginning of a reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. In November, Sasha called me for the first time. Friendly, easy, chatting about nothing in particular before steering us somewhere very specific. She and Derek were considering a quitclaim between themselves, she said. Something about tax planning, and she had a question. When you file one of those, does the county actually verify who signed it, or do they just record whatever's submitted? I kept my voice relaxed. Said I wasn't sure that my attorney had handled all of that I found paperwork headache-inducing. I played a woman who doesn't pay close attention to her own affairs. I could feel her uncoil through the phone. After we hung up, I sat very still. Derek had the desperation and the entitlement. But Sasha had the plan. She was the one mapping the mechanics, learning exactly how loose the locks on the system were, exactly how far a forged signature could travel before anyone stopped to check it. My brother would be the hand. His wife would be the mind. And somewhere in their rented house, the two of them were sketching a blueprint for taking the only thing I had ever built entirely for myself. My mother made it explicit, without meaning to, in early December. We were talking about Christmas, about whether I'd come home for dinner, and she was pressing the case warmly, enthusiastically, the way she pressed cases when she needed something. And then she drifted into talking about the house. My house. It's just an awful lot of house for one person, she said fondly. A home like that really ought to belong to the whole family. Somewhere everyone can come together. You shouldn't be alone in all that space. And then, gently, the way you repeat a saying so familiar you've stopped hearing it. You know how it is. We can only set so many places. She didn't hear herself say it. For 20 years, that sentence had meant there is no room for you here. Now she'd turned it inside out, and it meant something darker. You are the room that needs to be cleared. A house with my name on the deed was, to her, a table with an extra chair. One that didn't need to be there. I kept my voice steady. Told her I'd think about Christmas. When the call ended, I stood in my front hall, the spot where I'd imagined the long table the first day I walked through, and felt something settle in me. Cold and clear and almost peaceful. They were coming for the house. The only question was how, exactly, and when. I intended to know before they arrived. My instinct was to call Derek. To say it directly, I see exactly what you're planning and it stops right now. I am fundamentally a problem solver. I see a threat forming and I want to step in front of it. So I called Ruth instead. If you confront them now, she said, they back off. You have warm phone calls and your own read of the situation. No crime has happened yet. You can't prosecute a feeling. She paused. The law needs them to actually do it. But I just sit here and let them forge my name? I said. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying do the smart thing. You have a fraud alert that will tell you the moment they file. If they file, that's a felony recorded, with their names attached. If they then show up to take possession, that's the whole crime witnessed. Another pause. You don't dismantle a trap by warning the animal. I didn't love it. Every protective instinct I had wanted to act, to control the situation before it could happen. But I understood the logic. If I showed my hand now, they'd retreat into warmth and silence and try again later, smarter. If I stayed the unwitting girl with the duffel bag right up until they committed the crime in full, I could end it in a way that couldn't be undone. I made the hardest call of my life. I decided to let them believe they were winning. And then, very quietly, I started getting ready. Once I stopped pushing back, even slightly, they got bolder. Derek's texts changed. The casual friendliness dropped away and something harder took its place, the edge of a man who has already decided the outcome and is now just managing you toward it. You really shouldn't have a place like that to yourself, he wrote one evening. A house like that belongs to someone who actually shows up for family, not someone who ran off and never looked back. There it was again. A different church basement, different year. You're not really one of us, Melissa. Same song. New price tag attached. Another night, Mom and Dad are getting older. That house could give this whole family a foundation. Try thinking about someone other than yourself for once. I read these messages the way I read contracts, carefully, noting dates, watching a man construct a complete written record of his own motive. And I let him, because Ruth had taught me that the best evidence in the world is the kind your opponent hands you voluntarily. I wrote back things that were warm and deliberately vague. I hear you. Let's talk after the holidays. There's a lot to think about. Each message was bait, just enough to keep him certain I was softening. Inside I was the opposite of soft. Every cruel, entitled line landed on the same old bruise. The doorway. The kitchen stool. The math that always came up short. But the bruise had changed. It didn't make me small anymore. It made me certain. And certainty, I had learned, is a very quiet and very patient thing. The alert came on a Wednesday, December 4th, 4:52 in the afternoon. I was in my office reviewing schedule sheets when my phone lit up with an email I'd been bracing for since October. The subject line was plain and administrative, and it stopped every thought in my head. Property fraud alert. New document recorded against monitored property. I set down my pen. Opened the email slowly. A new instrument had been recorded with the county that afternoon. Document type. Quitclaim deed. Parcel mine. Grantor. Melissa Holloway. Grantee Derek Holloway. According to the county's official records, I had just signed my house over to my brother. I had signed nothing. I had been in this office all day with employees in the next room and a calendar full of appointments. Someone had taken my name, written it on a deed, and walked it across the counter at the county recorder. And the county had stamped and filed it exactly as Ruth had warned, without looking at the signature, without making a single call. I sat with that for a moment. Not rage, not panic. Something colder and cleaner than either of those things. Like a long equation finally resolving. They had committed a felony, recorded with their names on it, delivered straight into my hands. Now I had work to do. The next morning I drove to the county recorder's office and requested a certified copy of the filed deed. I paid the small fee, waited under fluorescent lights while a clerk pulled the document, and then held in my hands the paper that said my home was no longer mine. I read every word. There was my name in a signature that wasn't mine. Whoever had made it had studied my handwriting, probably from something old, a card or a letter, and had gotten the general shape of the letters approximately right. But the slant was wrong. The loops were wrong. It was the forgery of someone who'd practiced just enough to fool a stranger at a county window. It would never fool me. Below the signature sat a notary's stamp and seal, certifying that I had appeared in person and signed of my own free will. I had never met this notary. I had never been in whatever office this stamp belonged to. I photographed every page, logged the recording number, the date, the notary's name. I was already constructing it in my mind the way I'd constructed everything, methodically, brick by careful brick. Derek thought he had stolen my house with a piece of paper. What he'd actually done was hand me a felony with his name on it. And he had no idea I was already holding it. That afternoon I walked into the police department and asked for whoever handled property crimes. I sat across a desk from a detective named Marcus Webb, a deliberate, even-tempered man with the look of someone who had watched families do terrible things to each other for a long time and was no longer surprised, just thorough. I laid everything out in order. The deed in my name. The forgery filed that afternoon. The notary I'd never met. Derek's text, dated and saved going back to October. Sasha's call asking whether the county verified signatures. My mother's renewed warmth measured against the $87,000 of debt sitting underneath it. Detective Webb listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back and said, "Ma'am, in 19 years I've rarely seen someone come in this organized. I run a business," I said. "I keep records." He explained the charges. Forgery of a property instrument, filing a fraudulent deed with the county, both felonies carrying real prison time. Ruth, he confirmed, could file a notice of fraudulent deed to begin unwinding the recorded transfer. Then he said the thing I'd been circling for weeks. A forged deed on paper is one thing, he said, but it's considerably stronger if they try to act on it. If they show up to take possession. He paused. Juries understand possession. It turns paperwork into an event. I looked at him. He looked at me. In that plain gray room, the last piece of something I'd been refusing to fully imagine clicked quietly into place. There was one more thing I wanted. Not from the courts, from the light. My family had spent my entire life rewriting reality in quiet rooms, deciding who belonged with no one watching, no record being kept. I wanted witnesses this time. I wanted what happened to be seen. I called a journalist named Karen Doyle who'd been running a series in our local paper, All Fall on the Rise of Deed Fraud in Our County. Her most recent piece had a line I'd thought about more than once, that the cruelest version of the crime was also the most common one, because the person forging the signature almost always had a key to the front door. I told Karen my story over 2 hours at a coffee shop. The childhood, the company, the house, the forged deed, the texts and the phone calls and the $87,000 underneath all of it. She took notes without stopping. The family angle, she said finally. That's what people don't understand. Everyone pictures some criminal overseas. It's almost never that. It's almost never a stranger, I said. She asked if she could be present if and when it came to a head. I told her I thought Christmas Eve was the likely date, and that if it was, I wanted her there with her own eyes, so that no one could ever say afterward that I'd invented any part of it. She agreed. So now I had 3 things my family had never once accounted for in any version of me they'd allowed themselves to imagine. The law, the record, the light. All I had to do was open the door. Detective Webb and I met once more in mid-December to think through the timing. Your brother has a deed on paper, he said. But paper isn't worth anything until he can act on it. To sell quickly, to refinance, he needs to establish possession. He needs to be inside the house with change locks before you know what happened. He paused. So when would they believe the house was empty? We both already knew. Christmas Eve. Because for 20 years, the story my family had told themselves was that I spent the holidays alone. That I was somewhere else, unwanted, scraping through December by myself. They had spent decades making me the empty chair. And now that same story was going to be the mechanism of their undoing. They would assume the big house on Birchwood Lane was dark and vacant that night, its lonely owner off somewhere sad, exactly as they'd always imagined her. Sasha would want a locksmith. Change the locks, establish control, quiet and professional. If any neighbor asked questions, they were the new owners. Here was the deed. I thought about my mother's Christmas invitation, issued so warmly, pressed so hard. She had not been inviting me home out of love. She'd been trying to get me away from Birchwood Lane on the one night the plan required the house to be empty. So I declined it gently, in language calibrated to land exactly right. I think I'll just have a quiet one at home this year, I told her. Rest, you know. The holidays wear me out. I heard her satisfaction through the phone, a soft pause, almost imperceptible, the sound of a plan accommodating itself. She thought she'd confirm my location, home alone, easy to work around. What she'd actually done was confirm the date. On Christmas Eve, I did everything the empty house would require and nothing the trap would reveal. My car was parked 3 streets away. I'd walked back in the dark. Every window faced out into blackness. Inside, the house was not empty. Detective Webb was there, and 2 uniformed officers positioned away from the front windows. Karen was in the turret room with a clear view of the entrance hall, her camera ready. Ruth had advised on every procedural step. And I was in the front parlor in my good coat, in an armchair in the dark, with a folder in my lap. 2 pages. The recorded deed that said the house was mine. The fraud alert confirmation that promised I'd be the first to know if anyone said otherwise. The same 2 pages I'd laid on my kitchen table in the fall. They had been my anchor through all of it. Now they were going to be Exhibit A. My entire life, my family had set a table that never had room for me. Tonight in the dark, I had set one of my own. Every seat full. Every guest chosen on purpose. They just didn't know who I'd invited. The tires came first. The sound of a car moving slowly up a gravel driveway, careful, trying not to be heard. Then headlights swept across my dark front windows and died. Doors opened. Voices low, drifting up through the cold. I sat still in the dark and listened to my family arrive to take my home. I knew all of them by voice. Derek, talking too much the way he does when he's nervous and covering it with false ease. See? Dead. She's probably off feeling sorry for herself. A second voice I didn't recognize, clipped, businesslike. The locksmith. Then Sasha, low and sharp, telling everyone to move faster. And behind them, quieter, my parents. My father said almost nothing. My mother said, "Are we sure about this, Derek?" And Derek said, "Mom, it's legal. The house is ours. We're just taking what belongs to us." Footsteps on the porch steps. The heavy thud of a bag set down. Tools clinking. The locksmith said, "Standard deadbolt." Couple minutes. And then the thin, familiar scraping of metal easing into my lock. Above me in the turret, Karen was filming. In the dining room, Webb and his officers were still as held breath. I sat with my folder and I did not move. 20 years of being kept outside their door. And here they were picking the lock on mine. The lock gave. The deadbolt slid. My front door swung open into the dark, and my family walked into my house uninvited for the very first time. Sasha entered first, flashlight cutting ahead of her, efficient. Derek was right behind her, and the moment he crossed the threshold, something in him changed. The nervousness collapsed, and something older and more comfortable moved in to replace it. The kind of ease that gets raised into a person. "Look at this place," he said, his voice lifting to fill the hall. He was holding papers, the forged deed, waved in the air like a prize. "All of this. And now it's ours." The locksmith had gone quiet in the doorway, sensing something off in the room he couldn't name. Sasha was already moving deeper with the flashlight. "We change every lock tonight," she said. "By morning we're on record and in possession." Nobody argues with possession. My parents came in last. Slow. My mother's hand finding my father's arm in the dark. "It's so big," she murmured, and for one small moment she sounded frightened of it. Then Derek turned in a slow circle in my front hall and laughed, and said the thing that removed any last ambiguity about who these people were and what they believed. "She never belonged in a house like this anyway," he said. "She never really belonged anywhere." I reached over and turned on the lamp. Light flooded the room. For a suspended moment nobody moved. My family stood frozen in my bright front hall, blinking, caught mid-step, faces open and unguarded. Then Detective Webb stepped out of the dining room doorway. Unhurried, badge already in his hand. Behind him, his 2 officers. From the turret stairwell, Karen Doyle descended, camera already up. I rose from my armchair with the folder in my hand and looked at my brother across the hall of the house I had built. Derek's mouth opened. The forged deed was still in his fist. Evidence now, not power. "What is this?" he said. Then louder, the panic cracking through. "What is this, Charlotte? What did you do?" "Merry Christmas," I said. My voice was steady. I had wondered if it would be. "You can set the deed down, Derek. The officers would rather you didn't keep waving it around." That was when he came apart. All of it. The entitlement, the certainty, the practiced ease of a man who'd never really faced a consequence, dissolved at once into raw noise. "This is my house. It's legal. I have the papers. You set me up. You're always doing this, always trying to ruin everything." Sasha had gone completely still. Her flashlight hung dead at her side, her mind clearly running through every exit and finding them sealed. My mother had both hands pressed over her mouth. My father had not moved at all. He was looking at me, and there was something in his face I had never in 36 years seen there before. I stood in the center of my own lit hallway, surrounded by the people who had spent 2 decades deciding I didn't belong. And I have never in my life felt so completely, so quietly, like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Detective Webb handled the formal portion the way professionals do, steady and methodical, which only made Derek louder. Webb named each piece of evidence as he went. The quitclaim deed filed December 4th, transferring the property from Melissa Holloway to Derek Holloway, bearing a signature I had never produced. The fraud alert that had notified me the moment it was recorded. The dated, screenshotted texts in which Derek had explained, in his own words, exactly why he believed the house ought to be his. Sasha's call probing whether the county verified signatures. The $87,000 of debt underlying all of it. The locksmith was already talking, explaining rapidly that he'd been hired under the representation that this was a client's own property. Webb informed him, quietly, that he'd be giving a full statement. "Derek Holloway," Webb said, "you're under arrest for forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument. Handcuffs." My brother, the man who had told me in a church basement that I wasn't really one of them, stood cuffed in my front hall while a reporter photographed his face. Sasha was asking for her attorney before she was fully detained. It was my mother I finally turned to. She was crying, the same deep, pulled-under crying I'd watched from a distance every December at the window. Except this time the grief had a name. "Melissa," she said, "please. We can talk about this. We're family." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said the thing I had been carrying since I was 8 years old, counting chairs in a church dress, and I said it without anger, because anger would have let her dismiss it, and I needed her to actually hear it. There were always enough places, Mom. You just never set one for me. She had no answer. For the first time in my life, the woman who decided who belonged at the table had nothing left to say. My father didn't argue, didn't run. While Derek was being walked to the patrol car, still shouting, his voice breaking into something younger and more frightened with every step, my father simply sat down on the bottom stair of my staircase. An old man, suddenly every one of his 68 years, and he put his face in his hands. The officers let him sit. I went and stood nearby. Not close. For a long time he didn't speak. Then he said, without lifting his head, I always knew it was wrong. What we did to you. The chairs, all of it. Every Christmas I knew. His voice broke across the word knew. And I never said anything. Not once. I didn't tell him it was fine. It wasn't. I didn't forgive him then and there, because forgiveness like that is not a thing you give away at the bottom of a staircase to someone who's just watched you be arrested. It's a thing that gets earned slowly with a lot of weather between. But I asked him the question I'd been carrying longer than any of the rest of it. Why me? Why was it always only me? He looked up, and he told me about the baby. The first baby, a girl, born and lost before I came into the world, a grief my mother had never been able to climb out of, and into which my birth, arriving so quickly after the loss, had landed like an intrusion. Not a daughter. A reminder. Someone who looked like what she couldn't keep. The yellow blanket in the silver frame. The December silences. The table always one place short. She grieved a daughter, I said softly, by erasing the one she had. My father had no answer for that either. Here is what happened after. Derek and Sasha were both charged with felony forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument. The case never reached a jury. The evidence was too comprehensive, the recorded deed too clearly traceable. Sasha negotiated a deal and testified that Derek had personally forged the signature. Derek, faced with photographs of himself cuffed in my hallway, took a deal of his own. Both carry felony records now. The $87,000 is still owed, sitting on top of a criminal conviction, harder to escape than ever. Ruth filed the notice of fraudulent deed, and a judge voided the forged transfer within weeks. The house was mine again on paper, the way it had always been mine in fact. Karen's story ran on the front page the week after New Year's. She told the truth of it, that the person most likely to steal your home is almost never a stranger, and almost always someone you'd have let in for dinner. 3 different readers wrote in to say they'd checked their own county's fraud alert after reading it. My mother was never charged. There wasn't sufficient evidence to tie her hands directly to the forgery itself. But everyone in town reads the paper. The woman who had spent 30 years managing how her family looked from the outside got to watch the outside learn exactly who she was. She and I do not speak. My father writes me letters. Real ones in his handwriting, several pages each. I read them all. I haven't written back yet. I haven't thrown any of them away. The next morning, I changed every lock on the house myself, with my own hands, one by one, and re-enrolled in the fraud alert before I'd had coffee. Then I hung a single stocking by the fireplace. One name on it. Mine. The following Christmas, I set the long table by the south windows, the one I'd pictured from the first afternoon I walked through the empty house. 12 places. Every one of them full. Everyone set on purpose. Employees who had become something closer than colleagues. Claire, who had been loyal under all the noise. Neighbors from Birchwood Lane who had knocked on my door in January, just to say they were glad I was still here. For 20 years I had believed that belonging was something my family could grant or revoke. A chair they decided whether or not to carry out of the closet. I had spent my childhood trying to earn my way into their count. It was never theirs to give or withhold. It was always a table I could set for myself. I just hadn't known it yet. That Christmas, for the first time, the biggest house on the street felt like home. Not because of the deed. Not because of the verdict. Because of who was sitting at the table. And because I was the one who had set every place.